Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Hey y'all, I'm Frank King, and welcome to US Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and yes, hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Nowhere in the world celebrates modernism better than Palm Springs, California. Every February, they have a huge architecture and design festival called Modernism Week. A dazzling 10-day spectacle of architecture, martinis, lectures, art, architecture movies, parties, tours, exhibits, and the occasional plastic surgery gone awry. Our own George Smart was there talking poolside with keynote speakers, authors, and special guests during the entire week of Modernism Week. It's a tough job, but hey, I was busy, so somebody else had to do it. Support for US Modernist Radio comes from Realtor Angela Roll, your highly trained special agent for bringing modernist design expertise to buyers and sellers. You can reach Angela at angelaroll.com, that's roll, R-O-E-H-L, or give her a ring at 919-995-0550. Today, George welcomes back two great friends of the podcast, Ms. Modernism Annalisa Capurro from Australia, and author and architectural historian Alan Hess, who you've seen in nearly every architecture documentary. Let's go to Palm Springs.
Welcome to US Modernist Radio. This is George Smart, and I am poolside in Palm Springs, California at Modernism Week, which is to architecture what the Super Bowl is to football. This is where all the greats come for about 10 days during February to talk about mid-century modern architecture. And my guests here are two of my favorite people who are returning, who are on the show together for the first time. My first guest is Annalisa Capiro from Australia, also a.k.a. Ms. Modernism. She was a guest on the show last year, and I think maybe before that. And then also we have Alan Hess, who, if you haven't read his books, you have seen him in an architecture documentary. He is the Samuel L. Jackson of documentary films. He has been in more than anybody else. He's kind of our architecture action hero. He recently premiered in the new documentary Fray, Part 1. There's going to be a part 2. That's when we have the fight scene with Alan Hess and other preservationists. There's always an action sequence in these. So welcome you all. Thanks for coming.
We're glad to be here.
Yeah, it's so exciting to see you again and see you too, Alan.
Yes. It's always great to come to Modernism Week. You see so many great people, and especially those from around the world we don't usually see, like Annalisa.
Exactly.
Now, how did you two first meet?
Oh, well, I met Alan. He was actually one of the first people that I met in relation to preservation when I came to America. I won a scholarship, a professional development travelling scholarship, and I was looking at the preservation of mid-century modernist architecture. And Dion Neutra, Richard Neutra's son, invited me to a symposium in Orange County called Neutra's in Orange County. And there was Alan on the panel, and I was about to go to Modernism Week, 3 days later, and Alan was going to be the moderator on the panel that I was invited to speak at Modernism Week on preservation. So I met him in Orange County, and then we reconnected at Modernism Week, and he's one of my oldest friends from California.
Yeah, it was in Orange County, and I'm glad you had an introduction to modernism in Orange County, because most people don't even think that Orange County has any architecture to speak of. But in fact it does. Orange County, for your listeners who may not know, is the county just south of Los Angeles. It's part of the greater Southern California metropolitan area. And it
Disneyland
has,
County, right?
It has Disneyland, which is one of the most important master plan developments in the 20th century. It has Irvine, which is another of the greatest master plan communities. But we also have individual works like R.M. Schindler's Lovell Beach House.
Yes, very
from
important
1926,
house.
An incredible, internationally important piece of modern architecture. And we have Eichler house tracks. We have a lot, and people don't realize it.
Killingsworth?
Ed Killingsworth, yeah, definitely, and a lot of local people that are not as well known but should be. So, and Neutris, we have a lot of Neutris.
Yeah.
Now, Annalisa, you came out here on scholarship, you said?
I did,
time?
yes.
And what had you keep coming back now and becoming a regular fixture on the party circuit?
I know. I fell madly, passionately, deeply in love with Palm Springs, just like it seems everybody else does when they set foot here. So from the time that I arrived, I've come back pretty much every single year. So this is, I think I'm clocking up maybe 7-8 years now.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Alan's been coming here a long time.
I have. I don't remember exactly how long, but it was much smaller in the beginning, but it's just grown exponentially, and it's really wonderful to see. I've always done, of course, I wrote a book on Palm Springs modern architecture, Palm Springs Weekend, just at the very dawn of awareness of Palm Springs modern architecture.
That was 96, 97, somewhere in there?
I think it was 2001, but I may be wrong.
Okay.
But yeah, it started in the late 90s is when it first began to reach the general consciousness of the profession.
Yeah, Wallpaper magazine, I remember, did a spread on it.
Yeah.
And so it sort of brought it to attention, and then the Neutra House as well got a lot of attention.
It
and
was
brought people
restored
here.
then.
That was in the late 90s, wasn't it? Mid to late 90s, that's right.
And then Modernism Week kind of got kicked off in the early 2000s as an expo, and then formalized maybe 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah, I think it's the 13th year this year.
13th year. And they're saying now 100,000 guests are coming in this year.
That's what they're expecting.
That's pretty big.
Yeah. And you're walking around and you're going to these events and they're jammed.
Jammed.
They really are
the streets
jammed.
are jammed, exactly.
And it's so good because there are people literally from all over the country and the world. And they aren't just architecture professionals or academics or anything.
There's people interested in vintage cars. There's people interested in vintage fashion.
Yeah.
Everything.
I mean, you go to the Palm Springs Convention Center, which this past weekend, and see booths by all these wild people. There's everything.
And all the contemporary design, which is really interesting this year. There's a whole expo on contemporary design that's obviously been inspired by modernist and mid-century principles. So that's fabulous too.
Now, have the two of you discovered Bruce Lee Emerton's little store here in town?
Well, I know Bruce very well because he's part of a presentation that I've been doing every night here at camp, which is the centre of modernism, Mod with a Twist. And so Bruce is part of that.
Have you been to a store?
I haven't been to a store yet.
Okay, so what you want to do is go back down Palm Canyon this way. For our listeners, you can't see where I'm pointing, but that's okay. Go down this way, and on the right-hand side, there's a building called Galleria, and you walk into Galleria and go to back and to the left. This is directions for the listeners, too, if you want to find it. It's on Palm Canyon in Palm Springs. Bruce Lee Emerton. His store is called 20th Century, and it's about a 15-foot by 12-foot store. It's kind of like a very large prison cell, packed with original books from the 40s and 50s, original magazines. Everything you've ever cited, Alan, in some of your articles, you'll find the originals there.
How fabulous.
He has the series, there were, I think, 9 Time magazines in the 40s and 50s and 60s that put architects on the cover, which they don't do anymore.
No. Yeah.
He has those original editions.
How fantastic.
That you can buy there.
Oh, good. Well, he is a great collector. I know. I've known him for a number of years, but I didn't realize he had
He just opened a store this year.
Just opened.
Yeah.
A librarian?
He was an archivist.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's where I first came into contact when I was doing research on these abstruse, unknown topics.
That nobody cared about 20, 30 years ago. Exactly.
But Bruce was one archivist who said, "Oh, yeah, come back here. I've got some stuff you can see."
Yeah. And he has popular culture items from that time as well. Travel guides.
Wonderful.
About the Valley and Hollywood and photos. It's just unbelievable.
Well, what is good about that and Modernism Week is that architecture, and modern architecture in particular, it has gotten beyond just the elite or the academics or the people who have always kind of controlled what was important and not important about modernism, and it is becoming much more popular.
Yeah, and accessible
and accessible. And the thing is that is really one of the main ideas about modernism to begin with.
Well,
it was supposed to be to improve the life of the average person. It wasn't supposed to just make beautiful houses up in the mountains
for the elite, exactly,
right,
and the wealthy. Yeah,
that's right.
So finally,
it's sort of come full circle.
Coming full circle.
Yeah, which is wonderful to see. Especially when people like you and me have been fighting to preserve all of these buildings and educate people about just how important this period was.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about one particular building where you're from, the Sirius building.
Oh, yes.
In Sydney.
That we are fighting to save.
Yes, tell us a little bit about that building and what its status is currently.
Well, the status is not looking so good. It's a brutalist building.
Brutalist means lots of concrete.
Lots of concrete, that's right. And it was built in the late 70s, early 80s in Sydney. And there's a whole lot of people in Australia that have been fighting to save this building.
Is it apartments or offices?
Well, it's actually social housing. So it is a government-owned building that's been social housing. And the problem is, like what happens often, is that it's sitting on a very, very, very valuable piece of land that looks straight over Sydney Harbour to the Opera House. It's got multi-million dollar views. And so that's the problem, is that the government is saying that they can make more money by selling it off to a developer and rehousing people elsewhere in areas that are obviously not worth so much. So, and unfortunately, we were just talking about the resurgence of modernism and how now people appreciate this era. Brutalism is sort of the next cab off the rank. The thing is that, it's not loved. It's very unloved. It's really where, mid-century modern was maybe 20, 25 years ago. And obviously all that concrete doesn't tend to help a lot because people find it very cold.
Yes.
And also the name, brutalism, it's unfortunate because it actually comes from the French, brute meaning concrete.
Yeah.
But it sounds brutal, and so people sort of associate it.
Well, we need a new publicist for brutalism.
Well, this is my idea. I always call it béton brut.
Exactly.
Which is the original French term.
Exactly.
Which was then bastardized into brutalism, which is so nasty.
It doesn't help
PR.
Sell it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes.
So
Béton brut sounds to me like a preserve you put on your toast.
That's right.
And we could sell it as a fundraiser for the Sirius building.
Exactly.
Tasty, yeah.
So the problem was with the Sirius building is that obviously a lot of preservation groups and architectural groups had got together and the building was, on various lists in Australia. And then what happened is it was suggested then to the Heritage Council that this building be listed, heritage listed, because it's important, because in Australia now we are, like the rest of the world, starting to look at buildings from the 70s and 80s. And anyway, the government, even though all the evidence was there, they rejected the proposal to list it because they knew if they listed it, the price of it would drop significantly. And they said that therefore they wouldn't actually be able to make enough money when they sold it, which, legally had a bit of a problem because you don't not list something because you can't make money when you sell it.
Right.
So therefore what happened is we mounted, a whole lot of people in Australia got together with a crowdfunding. And, this is the amazing thing about crowdfunding. We mounted this, this whole crowdfunding, which raised enough money for the Institute of Architects and, this group Save Sirius, SOS, Save Our Sirius, to go to court to actually fight that. So we actually won that, meaning that it was illegal what the government had done. But then what happened is they had, a new heritage person had come in and they made another decision then based on the fact that they didn't believe that it needed to be listed.
So is it going to be destroyed at this point?
Well, it's going to be sold. And so the problem is, because they're going to sell it, it depends who buys it and what happens.
What's going to happen.
But, that's the thing. For a developer, to look at a building of that age, it's just not viable for them. That's what the developers say. But, there's so many architects in Australia have pro bono put together, adaptive reuse plans of how they could turn this into a hotel or apartments or something. But, again, it depends on who buys it and what happens to it. So it's sort of, in limbo at the moment.
Can I tell you a happy story about the developers cars?
Please.
In Los Angeles, we have Googie car washes, and these are from the 50s and 60s, and they're car washes, part of the car culture. They have these wonderful modern pylons which rise high into the sky. They're in completely open air, so you can see all the machinery washing the car. They're really important part of the period and great architecture. Well, there's a developer who develops apartments in Whittier, California, which is suburban Los Angeles. And he found this large piece of property, great for apartments, and it had a Googie car wash right on the edge of it. Now, he knew nothing about architectural history and knew nothing about car washes or Googie or modernism or anything, but something tipped him off, and he said, let's find out what this car wash is. Well, the upshot of it is he has bought the property. He is restoring the Googie car wash using modern car wash technology, which saves water, for example, which is important here in California.
Exactly.
And
recycles it and things
recycles
like that,
it, less chemically toxic and all of that sort of stuff. But the thing is,
there's a guy named Earl at the end who just blows on your car and makes it all dry.
Yeah. He saw the economic potential of this old building. And it's going to be listed as landmark. It isn't yet, but it will be. But he saw that he could quickly, adaptively, not reuse, but return it to its car wash purpose. And it would start making money for him immediately.
As opposed to demolishing it, rebuilding another building, investing in all of that.
Which takes time and money. Yeah.
Exactly. And then you've lost basically all of that, embodied energy that's just gone by throwing all the, materials into landfill.
So there's so many examples where reusing a historic building, even one as unusual as the Googie car wash, makes economic sense for developers. Now, this is a message we still need to get through to a lot of developers.
Well, it is, exactly.
But it's there.
It's totally there. And you think of all the people that are going to go particularly to that car wash because it's Googie. They're going to drive out of their way to go there because it stands out. It's not like every other car wash. The experience is different.
Exactly.
So that's also the thing is that these buildings embody not just the embodied energy and the materiality that we should be saving, they actually also embody stories. They embody, ideas. They embody opportunities for new experiences,
Mm-hmm. So, Alan, give people a quick overview of what Googie is. Because I know some people are thinking, did he say Georgian? Did he say, what did he say?
Did I say Google?
Yeah.
No, I did not.
What is
Alan's
Googie?
the expert. He wrote the book on it.
Yeah, a Googie architecture is the term relating to buildings related to the car culture of the 1950s and 1960s. The name comes from a coffee shop on the Sunset Strip built in 1949 by John Lautner, a student of Frank Lloyd Wright's and a great Los Angeles architect. The Chemisphere House, Silvertop, which was just restored.
The Elrod House here in Palm Springs. The Bob Hope House here in Palm Springs.
Exactly. He's very prolific. He was very prolific and incredibly creative. So he designed this coffee shop on the Sunset Strip, very hip place at that time. So hip that James Dean hung out there with his
Wow,
crowd.
that's hip.
Yeah, Marilyn Monroe, Elvis Presley, just to drop a few names.
It always helps.
Yeah. And
just small celebrities like those.
Minor league celebrities. But it was such a great piece of architecture that it grabbed people's attention, and it got written about in an article called Googie Architecture. And so it's given its name to this whole class of ultra-modern, car-oriented, often roadside architecture, starting in Southern California, but spreading all across the United States and Australia.
And Australia, too.
Yeah, I've written about, motels in Australia.
Yeah, you did, in the Australian Modern publication.
Right.
If you can't quite picture what Googie is, think of like a Shoney's or a Sonic today. That's a little bit like Googie.
Jetson-esque, you would say. Something out of the Jetsons.
Vivid use of metal structures, often these carport-type sheds where the cars could pull underneath and either park if it was a hotel, or if it's a drive-in, you could pull up the little intercom and order your burger and shakes and things like that.
Yeah.
Lots of angles and very futuristic looking.
The structure is expressed and often exaggerated because it also had to be seen and visible as you're driving by at 40 or 50 miles per hour.
With fabulous signage usually as well,
Neon
so that you could see it.
Neon
exactly.
signs, incredible neon signs.
Yeah.
a number of which from that era have ended up like in the Neon Museum in Las Vegas.
And Glendale.
And Glendale.
Another neon museum in Glendale.
Okay.
So it just shows you how, that's been elevated. Now there's a museum of neon, it's fantastic.
Exactly.
Well, let's talk about buildings on the radar. You mentioned earlier the Schindler Health House in
Newport Beach,
in
California.
Newport Beach. That's been in the same family for 40 or 50 years now?
Well, 1925, 26. So
longer than that.
9. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's coming up to its 100th birthday,
Wow.
in just a few years. Can you imagine?
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Now,
Because you look at it and you cannot, that's the thing. It doesn't look like it's 100 years old.
Yeah, no, it's still.
Because that's the thing about modernism, isn't it? It's just timeless.
Yeah.
It looks like it could have been built a couple of decades ago.
Yeah.
when the Lovell House came out, this was supposed to be the ultimate therapy. You could go to this house, if you were friends, but the family there would have a place to experience all of California's natural wonders. It was designed to have the kind of sustainable features we talk about today. You would take in the sun. You would feel healthier. It was called the Health House.
That's right.
Because you could go there. Was it the doctor, I believe, Dr. Lovell?
Philip Lovell was a doctor. He believed in healthy lifestyles. He wrote a column for the Los Angeles Times about healthy lifestyles. And, of course, that's an ongoing theme in Southern California. People came here for their health. The weather was more benign, the sun, et cetera, being out on the ocean as well, exercise, and so forth.
And that's why modernism and California work so well together, because the idea behind modernism as well, wasn't it? It was all about breaking down, those Victorian boxes and those dark, cramped, spaces where people were getting sick and had the plague in the 19th century and earlier. So it was about, wasn't it, bringing in sun and light and connecting people to nature and making people healthier and happier.
Yeah, and not only healthier, but having a more pleasurable life.
Well, that's
the
right.
thing. California modern architecture, I think Australia as well, because of the weather and so forth, was about pleasure. It wasn't just about, we must be a soldier in the legion
which
of
is
the modern.
More European
which
idea.
is a European idea. Yeah, it was, hey, you want a swimming pool in your house?
Exactly.
You want the views of the mountains and you want sunlight coming in all day. Okay, hey, man, go ahead. We'll give it to you.
And especially post-war. That's the thing. That's why, obviously, buildings of the 50s and 60s, particularly in California, isn't it?
Yeah.
That post-war optimism, that idea that suddenly there was going to be leisure time, that the war was over, that people were at peace again, baby boom, people were settling down, having families, and enjoying life again.
Yeah.
Well, if you're thinking about how to picture this house, you can pull up images from one of its star turns, which was the movie L.A. Confidential.
No.
Is that
That's
wrong?
the
that's
Neutra
the
Health House.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's
Same client.
Okay, sorry. Oops.
Because
there's a story. There's a good story behind that, isn't there? I think we should maybe share that story.
Well, Schindler was the first client for the Lovells and built this vacation home on the beach, and it was out of concrete. About that same time, Richard Neutra finally immigrated from Austria over to Los Angeles, and he knew Schindler, and they worked together, lived together, literally, in Schindler's house, and worked on a number of interesting projects. Schindler then built this wonderful house for the Lovells, but then the Lovells decided they wanted to build another house in Los Angeles, and that commission went to Richard Neutra. He was still living under the same roof as Rudolf Schindler, and they were partners and so forth, but it
Didn't go over so well.
did not go over well.
Well,
no.
it destroyed their friendship, didn't it?
It did.
For many decades until they re-met in hospital,
Exactly.
coincidentally, when Schindler was dying.
Right.
And then they evidently made up again. It's a fascinating story.
It is a great story.
We recently had on the podcast Schindler's daughter-in-law,
Oh, wow.
who is still alive. Coincidentally, she was also Groucho Marx's therapist. Just a little trivia point there.
That was a big job, I'm sure.
Just briefly, it was during the time where his then companion, it was questionable about how good a care she was taking care of him in the 80s, towards the end of his life. Mm. And she was telling about how she and her husband, Mark, who was Schindler's son, lived in the house with the two parents, who by then had separated most of their lives, but were still living under the same roof. I think she's 94 now, something like that. Just as sharp as a tack. I mean, she just has remembered everything about this. And then we also talk with Schindler's great-grandson, who is 20 and is now a docent in the Kings Road house.
Oh, isn't that fantastic?
Which is really amazing.
Great.
So do we have to worry about any of these houses, Alan? I mean, do we need to be putting these level houses on our radar to conserve, or?
We always must remain vigilant.
We always.
Yeah.
Because even houses with listings, unfortunately, they catch fire and they're gone. So it doesn't even listing things doesn't actually guarantee it. But that's why I'm so passionate, like Alan, is about education, because it's about educating people.
We need to let the general public know, and therefore also, public officials who make and enforce these laws, so that when something is threatened, they can do something about it. And there's a constituency behind it that will support the preservation of these buildings. Because, these buildings, there are always, with any building, maintenance issues, deferred maintenance often, so they can just kind of crumble.
And particularly...
I love deferred maintenance. It's such a glorious term to put on not doing the work on the house.
Exactly.
It's like, this body is deferred maintenance right here.
And then also when houses pass to next generation, don't always know if the children or grandchildren are going to be as interested as the original,
whether they can afford it, or whether they need to sell to divide the estate. Often happens. Whether they appreciate it.
Let's talk about a real success story. John Lautner designed a house up in the hills. Do you know what house I'm talking about there?
The Sheets Goldstein.
The Sheets Goldstein house. This is the big.
It was given
Lebowski.
to the Los Angeles County Museum of Art.
Oh, okay.
LACMA.
Yeah,
LACMA. The owner is kind of getting up there in age, although you wouldn't know it from meeting him. He's kind of the Hugh Hefner perpetual playboy.
Yeah, or by the way he dresses as well.
And his glamorous, women.
Yes, if you tour the house, which you can do from time to time, you see a parade of people, 1/4 his age, that he's been escorting around. And the house was featured in the movie The Big Lebowski quite prominently, as well as many, many other films and hundreds of commercials, I believe, especially since they added on a combination tennis court nightclub at the house.
That's right.
That they have parties at and receptions, and people get married there, I believe. And it has this incredible view of downtown. The future of this house is pretty well assured now.
Yes, now that it's been given to the LA County Museum, and it will be open for tours and events and so forth. Of course, it won't be a residence anymore, which is sometimes kind of a loss.
Yeah.
But it will be accessible to people. And it is a great piece of architecture, excellent example of Lautner's work, all concrete, very angular, kind of triangular elements throughout the house, but with a great sensitivity to the site and nature, bringing nature indoors and so forth. So it's a great design.
Now, talking about Lautner, he had a protege, Helena Aruete, who is still around with us, doing very well. I understand she is doing some of the renovation on the Bob Hope House for its new owner.
Because it's just been sold recently.
Been sold. She's been quite the unsung hero, I think, of a lot of Lautner projects. She's not often mentioned that much very prominently, but she should be.
Yeah.
You've met her, right, Alan?
Yeah, I know her very well, and she is an excellent architect. And she was first hired by Lautner back in the late 60s when he was doing the Arango House down in Acapulco. Which was concrete. It was being built in Mexico. Lautner needed somebody who understood the metric system, who understood concrete, and spoke Spanish. And Helena had lived in South America and so forth. And she was quite young at the time. I don't know exactly, but
in her 20s.
But well educated, well schooled in concrete construction and so forth. So she was the perfect person for Lautner to hire for that. And then they remained associates till Lautner's passing.
She's spoken here, though, at Modernism Week.
She's spoken here, and she also, I think, technically still runs Lautner's office.
It's called Lautner Associates, yeah.
And she's been doing some other exciting work on her own as well.
Yes.
Over the last, has it been 24 years since Lautner passed away?
The 90s, yeah.
94?
Mid-90s, somewhere,
Something like that?
Yeah.
I understand that he was the official architect of the Olympics that was here in 84. He was designated somehow to be an architect for that, but I couldn't find any reference to if he'd done any buildings or advised people on that process. Do you know anything about that?
I had never
don't
heard
either.
that.
Okay.
He was, a prominent, would have been somebody to go to, but unfortunately never got any large public commissions.
No, not at all.
He did some great commercial work and great residential work, but
mainly restaurants and smaller commercial work like that, wasn't it?
Yeah, one of which, a flower shop in Burbank, has just recently been rediscovered. So there's still Lautners out there that we don't know about.
Isn't that fantastic?
But I haven't heard that he had been associated with the.
Yeah, I see little footnotes to that in different descriptions of Lautner, but I never see anything else. It's just this association with the 84 Olympics.
Nothing was ever built.
Yeah. He might have been on a committee or something at the time to do that.
Interesting,
yeah.
So as Veteran Modernism Week alumni now, what can you tell the public about why they should come out here and have fun with us?
Because it's fun.
It is. Because, you can get to have a cocktail at, Frank Sinatra's house. You can ride a bus tour. You can hear people like Alan Hess speak about Frank Lloyd Wright. You can hear everything from academic lectures right through, to cocktail parties, right through to vintage cars, right through to vintage markets. You can buy souvenirs to take home. You can see incredible houses by, international architects of modernism that have been either restored, that have been renovated. You get the whole gamut here. You can learn how to work on your own mid-century house. You can get information on that. There's just really everything, as Alan was saying, for anybody who's got an interest, whether it's a passing interest, whether it's you're interested in popular culture of the time, whether you're interested in architecture, you're an academic, you're an historian. It's really for everybody.
Yeah.
That's why there's over 100,000 people here these days.
And it's a very human event as well. They have made a conscious effort over the years to bring in these architects and designers who are advanced in age but have done incredible work, not always well recognized, but you get to meet them here.
So for me, that's been one of the absolute highlights, as Alan just said, is meeting these architects, especially Donald Wexler. He's somebody that when I first came here, as I said, all those years ago, he was at a cocktail party, and I saw him sort of standing there, and he's my absolute hero. I went over and talked to him, and as Alan said, it's that human thing. We became friends, and I was so lucky to have known him for a number of years, and now I'm friends with his family, even though he's gone. So that's it. And Hugh Capter, I've had the privilege to meet Bill Kreisel, who's also left us now. That's the thing. It is extraordinary. There's obviously less and less of them, but that is what is amazing about Modernism Week, is that they really get you connected to the key people of the period.
Yeah, and this year, just yesterday, they had an event bringing together 3 truly legendary women designers. And I've gotten to know a couple of them as well, and they're just incredible people in their 80s and 90s. Not as well recognized as they ought to be, but that's the purpose.
Obviously being female probably had something to do with it.
A lot of stories about that.
Exactly.
But I want to mention them because they're really amazing. Gerry Kavanagh is a designer working in Los Angeles. She went to Cranbrook. I think she said she was like the 5th woman to study at Cranbrook, along with Ray Eames and Florence Knoll. This is a very highly selective group. She had that talent. Then she worked with Harley Earl at General Motors on design, and Victor Gruen in Los Angeles, and went on her own, worked with everybody. Extraordinary portfolio and woman and designer, and what it took to achieve that, again, as a woman. And then there's Ruth Adler Schnee, who also went to Cranbrook just before Gerry Kavanagh. And she was friends and worked with Eero Saarinen and Harry Bertoia and Charles and Ray Eames, and just absolutely a direct window into that incredible era of American design. And she was here and talking about her work, and she's just a delightful person. And then the third one was Barbara Stoffaker Solomon, based up in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Bobby, she calls herself.
Bobby, Solomon. For example, she worked on the graphics of Sea Ranch, the famous Moreland and Turnbull Whitaker resort community up in Sonoma County, Northern California as well.
And she was almost the inventor of the super graphics.
Yes. So,
and incredible woman as well, dynamic.
Yeah.
And at the cutting edge, studied in Switzerland, and she knew all of these people, that were at the sort of cutting edge of modernism, in Europe. At that time.
Yeah. And if, it's got to be said, if they had been men, we would be talking about them in the same breath as Eero Saarinen and Charles Eames.
And there'd be books written about them.
And
exactly.
There'd be many more men.
And speaking of women, that's actually my lecture this year at Modernism Week. I tied into that as well, because there is this theme of women in design. So I'm actually doing a lecture on Thursday about an Australian mid-century wallpaper designer called Florence Broadhurst.
Okay.
And she's now well known in Australia, but not so well known here in America. Absolutely fascinating woman. She was born at the end of the 19th century in 1899, so she lived, through the whole of the period of where modernism came to the fore. She was brutally murdered in Sydney in her showroom in 1977, and to this day the murder is still unsolved. And she had this fascinating life right up until the time she was 60, and she set up this wallpaper business at 60 years of age with absolutely no experience in any sort of design. She'd been a showgirl in Asia in the 1920s. She'd been a fashion designer in London in the 1930s, where she basically came up with an identity of being French. She had an entire life that she had concocted different names, different identities, and when she was murdered, the people weren't only shocked that this high society wallpaper designer was murdered right under their noses, but people were shocked to find out that she wasn't English, that she wasn't a painter. She was actually born in outback Queensland, in this tiny little town of like 350 people, and she'd had this extraordinary life. So I'm about to expose her story and her designs to everybody here at Modernism Week.
This sounds like a case for the two of you to solve together. The murder of Florence Broadhurst. I can see the two of you in Australia doing the tour, finding the forensic evidence.
CSI, Australia.
Exactly.
Right. Yes. Right. Well, thank you all so much for dropping by the pool here and talking with us and sharing your experience with Modernism Week.
Oh, well, thank you for having us again.
Yeah, and thank you, George, for your efforts in spreading these words.
Oh, exactly. Your website is the website to go to, so make sure anybody who's listening, if you're interested in anything to do with modernism, go to George's website. He has the largest archive of information on modernist architecture and design in the world, I believe.
And it's growing all the time.
And it's growing.
Thanks for listening.
Hey, want to go to Modernism Week in Palm Springs next year and hang out with the cool kids? Plus George Smart? Send an email to george@ncmodernist.org. US Modernist Radio is underwritten by Angela Roll, your special agent for Modernist Houses. You can reach her at 919-995-0550. Okay, Tomas, take us out.
Visit USModernist.org to listen to previous shows and discover our massive mid-century modernist archives. US Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Cindy Stratton, not a real name, researches guests from a secret underground bunker very close to Whole Foods. US Modernist Radio is a production of Triangle Modernist Archive, a nonprofit educational organization for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. Stay tuned for more shows from Modernism Week on US Modernist Radio.